Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified, and today we've got some excellent shallow water square bill crankbait tips that I think is going to help you guys catch some really good fish. So let's check it out. You know, one of the most important aspects of shallow cranking is deciding what area of the lake you need to fish and what water depth you need to fish. And there's several factors that play into that, and a lot of it has to do with the water temperature, actually a combination of the water temperature and the water clarity, depending upon the season that you're fishing. Now, when we're talking about shallow crankbaits, we're talking about crankbaits in general that run 5 feet or less. You know, my favorite are the ones that will run like 2 to 4 feet. So I'm going to give you guys sort of an overview, sort of a foundation that will give you guys a good starting point. Obviously, there's other variables involved, such as weather conditions, sunlight intensities, but in general, this is sort of what I look for. Now, when I'm shallow cranking, you know, winters, there's really only 3 seasons. Winter's not really a factor for shallow cranking. I divide it into like the pre-spawn period, and then the late spring, summer, and into fall, those type of areas. Now, when I'm shallow cranking during the pre-spawn, this is generally, I'm looking for water temperatures to hit that upper 40s to 50 degree mark. Once you move out of the winter patterns and you initially first start seeing those water temperatures rise, usually depending upon your part of the country, it's going to be February, early March. You got a group of some better quality fish that start to move up into that 3 to 5 foot zone. Now, this time of year, during the pre-spawn, I'm looking for a little bit cleaner water than I normally would with shallow cranking. So what I like to focus on is some type of water visibility sort of in that 2 to 3 foot range. That's sort of like the sweet spot when you're dealing with water temperatures in the upper 40s and around 50 degrees. In general, under those conditions, I'm using some type of a shallow running flat-sided crankbait. That seems to work a little bit better. And usually this pattern will hold up until that water temperature starts to get sort of into the mid to upper 50s. Once you start getting 56, 57 degree water temperature, that bite sort of goes away. But when you're dealing with 50 degree water, this is a really good technique. The next time that I shallow crank, I don't shallow crank much during like the key areas of the spawn. So for me, like the mid part of April to the mid part of May is not a real good month for that, or time frame, but it starts to come into play a little bit more in the post-spawn into late May, June, and into the summer. Now, once those fish come off the beds, you know, you're still going to have a population of fish live shallow. Some are going to go deep, but some are going to be shallow, feeding on bluegills. Bluegills are starting to spawn, shad spawn, bluegills will spawn all summer long. And what I'm looking for from about when the water temperature starts to get like in the mid 70s up until it falls below 60 degrees into the fall, so we're talking about like late May into maybe November, depending upon what part of the country you're in. In this situation, it's all about water clarity, and I'm hunting the dirtiest water I can find in the lake. Now, if you're fishing a man-made reservoir, obviously there, you know, a lot of it depends if you're fishing man-made or a natural body of water, but in general, we're going to cover man-made reservoirs here. I'm looking for the most dirty water in the lake, and normally that's going to be in the upper river arms, the upper creek arms. That's where you're going to find your overall stained water in the upper portion of the lake. This is prime shallow water cranking type of an area. Once that I locate that particular type of an area, the thing that I have to do is really figure out the key structures that the fish are on. But those are the areas that I generally focus on, and we'll get into the specifics of it here in a second.
Really quick, if you're enjoying the detailed instruction in this video, then head to our website, fishthemoment.com, and check out our virtual seminars page. Here you'll find seminar recordings from past seminars we've done on a variety of bass fishing topics, from seasonal bass movement, electronics, offshore bass fishing, and how weather affects bass. These are 3-hour seminars with extremely detailed graphics and instruction that we spend hours putting together so that they're extremely clear and impactful. If you want to take your fishing to the next level and enjoy the content on this channel, definitely check out our virtual seminars, because I know you'll love the content. Check them out at fishthemoment.com.
You know, the type of cover that you want to fish shallow crankbaits on, it really depends on the makeup of the lake you're fishing. I mean, some lakes are different. They got different rock compositions. They get different bank angles. Some lakes have grass. Some lakes don't have grass. So again, you have to sort of have a foundation to begin with, and you can modify it on your own particular lake. But the structures that I fish with shallow running crankbaits are pretty much the same all year long, regardless of the water temperatures and the water visibilities. One of the key pieces of cover that you really need to concentrate in is rock. Now that rock can come in the form of riprap banks, it can be larger boulder type rocks, it can be bluff banks, it can be pea gravel. There's a large variation as far as the rock structures that the bass will use, and a lot of that has to do, again, with the composition of the lake you're fishing. In general, what you're going to find though is there's going to be sweet spots amongst those particular rock areas. Now the sweet spots are like, rock transition areas, which are really obvious, that type of stuff. But the other variables that you need to really focus in on when you're talking in terms of structure is how the bank slopes off. As far as the angle of the bank will determine a lot, has to do with your boat positioning and your casting angle. But rock is, in my opinion, one of the #1 structures throughout the course of the year. Normally what I have found is that rock will produce better quality fish in the pre-spawn. So I'm really thinking about catching those good fish off of rocky banks, again, when that water temperature is in the upper 40s, around 50 degrees. Now, it's good all year long, but as far as when you're going to catch the bigger fish, it's going to be under those conditions. Now, you can catch big fish off rock all year long, don't get me wrong, but the majority of the big fish that you're going to catch shallow cranking is going to be in the pre-spawn. Once that water temperature starts to warming up into the other period we talked about in the 70s during the summer and fall months, that's when the mixed diversity of cover is going to play in, and that's when you start catching more good fish off of isolated wood. Isolated wood targets are a key piece of shallow water cranking cover, and normally they can be on steep banks, they can be on flats, they can be on flatter banks, wherever you have it. But one of the things that separates really good shallow cranking anglers versus people that are not very good at it or just have marginal success is their ability to break down isolated cover and hit it effectively from different angles. If you've got a good area of the lake, say if you're fishing a part of the lake and you're catching some fish and you know there's a population of fish in the area that you're fishing, anytime that you pull up to a prime piece of isolated wood, whether it be a laydown, a stump, an isolated dock, anything like that, there's a bass living on that piece of cover, whether you catch it or not. And the key to catching it shallow cranking is you've got to approach it at different angles and the right angles, because a lot of times these fish are highly pressured. You're not going to catch them the first cast, you may not catch them the 5th cast, but you have to attack it at the right angle, because these fish position in one piece and on one piece of cover in a certain direction, and if you don't come past that piece of cover just at the right angle, you're not going to catch many fish. The guys that catch fish on the 1st or 2nd cast have come upon a piece of wood that has an aggressive fish on it, but you're trying to maximize and you're trying to catch the most fish you can, even if they're not aggressive with that. So that's another piece of cover that you really want to focus in on. Another real good area that I like to fish in there is underneath dock walkways and on the inside part of the docks. One of the key little trick deals I do in the summertime with shallow cranking is I'll take a 7-foot, fairly heavy action rod with 20-pound test line, and I'll put a little square bill on it, and I'll pitch it and flip it around in the boat dock slips, underneath boat docks if they've got pilings, underneath walkways, just like I'd flip a jig, and I make 15-20 foot pitches around the corners of those docks and burn that little crankbait just underneath the floats and under the pilings of those docks, and you can catch some really good ones like that. Those are my 3 primary things. So you need to focus on rock, you need to focus on wood, docks, and grass is one other option, but that's sort of a completely different type of a pattern, but that's really what I look for in structure. Boat positioning is key on any shallow water technique, but it's really key on shallow water crankbait fishing, because the angle of the cast that you make with the shallow water running crankbait makes the difference between catching bass and not catching bass. So here's a couple of different things I try to keep in mind as far as my boat positioning. The first thing that I found out, and there's a lot of people that may disagree with me on this, but it's been my experience from fishing it for as long as I have, is I always like to position my boat where I'm casting with the wind. There's something about when you're casting with the wind, your bait it's more natural in the water. You're quieter. Your trolling motor doesn't have to be quite so noisy, and I just simply get more bites with it. So I always try to position my boat anytime that I go down a bank, especially a rocky bank, where I'm going with the wind. So say for example, if I'm running down a lake and I see a good looking bank I want to fish, I always check the direction of the wind, and I come in and I start moving down with the wind with that. I see so many people out there fighting the wind when they're shallow cranking, and it makes it very difficult to cast accurately. It makes it very difficult for your bait to look as natural with that, and you're always on the trolling motor, which is a negative because you're in shallow water, and you don't want that trolling motor kicking on and off all the time. And if you're trying to fish in a strong wind, it's going to be super loud when you're in less than 5 foot of water. So that's number one. The second thing about boat positioning is you really have to study the angle of the bank that you're fishing. When you're shallow cranking, you are not going to catch many bass unless you're hitting the bottom, either hitting the bottom or hitting some type of wood cover with that, deflecting. The thing that makes bass bite shallow crankbaits is deflection. Now you can catch them once in a while. I'm not saying it's impossible to do it, but the big fish that you catch shallow cranking usually always comes off after some deflection. So in order to get deflection, you have to have your boat position just right to do it. That's why my favorite thing to do when I'm shallow cranking is I want to parallel that bank, because I'm thinking in terms of that 1 to 3 foot zone. And if I'm going to get in that 1 to 3 foot zone, if I position my boat tight on the bank parallel, that allows that bait to stay in that strike zone 75–80% of the time. Now if I was on that same bank at a 45-degree angle and approaching that bank with my boat positioned at a 45-degree angle, I'm in that strike zone 25% of the time. So always try to position your boat where you're going parallel to the bank on any type of a rocky, gravelly type of a bank, and once you figure out the depth of fish are in. Sometimes they're going to be super shallow if the water's off colored, and that's where they cover that, and other times they may be down at the maximum part of a shallow crankbait, which is that 4 to 5 foot zone. So be very aware with that. Thanks again for tuning in to today's edition of Bass Fishing Declassified. And guys, if I could leave you just a couple pieces of advice here, is pay close attention to your color selection and your retrieves on square bill crankbaits, because once you hit that magic combination, it's going to add up to a lot of good fish for you. See you guys next time.